Welcome to Full of Chit-Chat After Dark. This is the first ever nighttime recording. I mean, there have been 3 episodes so far, so that's not as impressive as I'm making it sound. Still, this is my first time recording in a bathrobe, so I hope that honor is not lost on my guest, whose presence is an honor. I am very happy to be speaking to my friend, Squamish Nation councillor, Vancity board member, my credit union. So maybe we'll talk about how healthy my personal financial picture is looking 11 months into pandemic. Khelsilem, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You put forward and asked who would commit to the following formulation as a territorial acknowledgement. Share it with us and tell me why. I mean, it's obvious why it's important, but expand on it. And do you think people will take you up on this?
I mean, maybe the folks at Spartacus Book School, and then 20 years, Chevron will, right? Like, that's the point. So the tweet that I put was a 2021 Territorial Acknowledgement Resolution. Quote, I recognize this as, and then in brackets, name of Indigenous peoples. So you insert the name, territory. I am committed to seeing their territory, including lands and waters, returned or compensated for. End quote. I mean, it's Article 17 of the UN Declaration, which is to return territories and lands to Indigenous peoples or have them compensated for it. So you're just supporting the basic human rights of Indigenous people by committing to this. Why would you say no?
It's so straightforward because it really is like it's just the next part of the sentence. Yeah. Really, like if you just go, I acknowledge that this is a stolen stereo. Like it means nothing if you keep playing your CDs on it. CDs, I don't know who the fuck I think is listening to CDs. I'm still at Spartacus Books in the late 90s in this scenario, but like. Yeah, so if this is stolen land, if it's unceded territory, if it's broken treaty territory, which from sea to sea to sea it is, then what is the logical outgrowth of that? What is the and what you've said there is just so pithy, but I feel like it runs against both. On the right, it runs against the resistance on the right and center to actually write any checks to, and I mean that metaphorically and literally. And on the left, I think it runs against the sort of moral theatrics of politics, which is because what's in there as well is a kind of practical question of like. Or compensated for, which does raise the question that I think a lot of people don't want to address of like, okay, well, what would it look like to justly compensate for? Because if you acknowledge this land is stolen, and we also understand we're not all buying tickets back to where we're from, partly because. A bunch of us are from a bunch of different places.
And also, just as a side note, because I think that comes up for a lot of people. I know you're saying it kind of jokingly, but I think that there are people who respond with that. Like, what is decolonize? Are you telling me I'm going to have to go back? Like that. There's just this kind of reactionary responses. But like, actually, like forcing a bunch of people to leave their country and ship them somewhere else is actually a human rights abuse.
Yes. That's also never been put forward as I've never heard that articulated really even in anger. I mean I'm sure there are people who have wished it in their less generous moments, and I can fully understand and relate to that wish. And I mean
but it's not a legitimate call to action by anybody, really legitimate. But so the moment in my political career, the moment that I knew that, really, when you have to look back at it, I think a lot of people criticize the territorial acknowledgements as being fluff or performative or shallow and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, sometimes it is. Like, I don't disagree. But let's take a wider view, which is it means we're winning, guys. Like, we're winning the conversation, because I remember many, many years ago, and this at the time was like kind of like, wow, like wow, they're doing it. They're including this. I remember about halfway through Gordon Campbell's term as premier, that there was a moment where all of a sudden all of the BC Liberal MLAs were doing territorial acknowledgements when they would get up on a podium at a community event in their riding. And what I was told is that the premier, the leader of the party, and the premier in the caucus meeting said, from now on, all of you are to acknowledge the territory of the nations that you're on when you're out and doing events. Like, it was an order from Gordon Campbell to his caucus. BC Liberals, are they, the pro-Indigenous party? I wouldn't give them those marks. I wouldn't give any party those marks, but like, right. It was just a moment where I'm like, okay, like, yes, it's performative, and yes, it seems symbolic and all that kind of stuff, but it means that the conversation is like really shifting.
People who weren't in BC 30 years ago, like it might not, you may not be able to resonate with just what that signifies, and just culturally, right? I mean, it really is, and it is, there is just so much further to go. And I think it's also, there is a different, there's a different charge to you acknowledging this versus me acknowledging this, in the sense of like, I really don't think it's all that productive for non-Indigenous Canadians to sit back and think, we've really come a long way in this country. But I mean, in our private moments, I do think it's important to clock the change, because if you don't, then you can lose, I guess lose the sense of what helped you, or what helped the people and the movements that you want to support make up that amazing ground. Because I mean, it's not an entirely transformed political reality from when I was a kid, although there are big changes, but culturally, in a lot of ways, I mean, not in others, but culturally, it's really, I mean, almost unrecognizable in some.
Okay, and so like my thing is like I think like you're pointing out, like if people were to take this up, right, I acknowledge that this is the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and I commit to supporting the repatriation of their territory back to their communities, or that those communities be compensated for it. And now we're going to sing happy birthday for Steve, because it's Steve's birthday today. So everybody, like, cool, great. Like, let's get there. Because I see MLAs from all parties, doing territorial acknowledgements, and they include it on their business card, or they include it on their email signature. And, every MLA I've seen do it, of every political stripe. Well, who's going to be the first MLA to actually do what I'm saying, which is to call for land to be given back, or for Indigenous nations to be compensated? Who's going to be the first? Because eventually there will be 2, and eventually there'll be 5, and eventually there will be over 50% of the of the legislature. And then when are we going to have platforms where the commitment is to repatriate back to Indigenous communities? Because the reality is, it's already happening. Like, it's happening behind the scenes. It's just not happening in a kind of fully democratic way. And when it's clear that there is a consensus, or a strong level of support for that direction to happen, then it gives movement to the political leaders to move towards those types of policies. and I see it all the time. Like I had a conversation with a couple of city council members here in Vancouver who were very open and said, I think we should be giving land back to your communities. Like, we've acknowledged this as your territory and we acknowledge that we stole it from you. Like, we should give it back. You know, there's a handful, like a couple I know of who have told me that, and they've said it publicly, so I don't feel like I'm spilling the beans on them.
Right.
But pretty soon, I totally conceivable that a majority of the city council would probably say that and believe that, and that they would get elected for it, because people would be like, yeah, I do think that those communities, like, you know, they haven't benefited from the complete, absolute destruction of their territory, so that we can, you know, shop on Granville Street.
Thanks for listening to the Full of Chit-Chat podcast, hosted by Charlie Demers from the shores of beautiful Trout Lake in East Vancouver, in unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Full of Chit-Chat is a product of charliedemers.substack.com, where you can subscribe for exclusive new writing weekly, essays, reviews, and humor. The podcast is produced for the Harbinger Media Network by Andre Goulet. Visit harbingermedianetwork.com to find fantastic progressive programs like the outstanding Oats for Breakfast and other listener-supported podcasts transmitting from the world to come.